Sanibonani Bafundi. Today I'm going to be doing the facing of a bespoke jacket. Please pardon the chaos that's happening here. I'm busy painting the studio whilst working, whilst doing 1,000 other things. And I have this tendency to, especially if I'm under time pressure, I'll just like shove everything to a side, have a space to work on. And then when I have time, usually every Monday morning, we just organize everything and put everything back where it goes. But through Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and today is Sunday, so it's an accumulation of a week. But anyway, whatever that's all about, don't stress about that. Let's talk about doing the facing for a bespoke jacket. And you see here, I've got the front piece laid out. And usually I'll just cut the pattern exactly like this because I've already used this. I already have the front piece ready. Here it is. And it's already been fitted and gone through that whole process. If I'm doing another one, I'll retrace this so that I have a separate front piece and a separate facing section. But whatever. So yeah, here I cut it out. I cut it out like this from the front of the dart here. I go 4 to 5 centimeters, kind of depending. I like keeping everything in proportion. But I like to be quite a bit in front of the pocket so that I'll still be able to stitch this facing onto the horsehair. So I don't want it to be too close to the pocket because then it tends to come over the pocket. It's a bit tougher to kind of secure it down to the horsehair. So I go 4 to 5 centimeters ahead of the pocket. And I also don't want to be too close to this curve here. I like to be exactly on this straight piece. Because if you have a curve and a seam, it becomes a little bit difficult to do. So I like going a little bit forward, not so forward to the curve, and oh yes, also I like this to be straight. I don't think there's ever actually a reason you could have this as a curve, but I like it to be straight in front of the dart, which is also obviously in front of the pocket. And then here on the shoulder, I measure half and I kind of just glide that in. I do make this as straight as possible. You can see here the original line was down there, the perpendicular line to the shoulder. And I ended up kind of just scooching it over so that I can smoothly curve into this line down here. Then the chest pocket, you don't want to be directly behind your breast pocket on the outside. So this inside pocket, you want to be a little bit hidden or a little bit below or above, in this case below, so you don't have too much bulk in one spot. So I draw that in, and then I draw again about 4 or 5 centimeters down, and then up. I also don't want too many seams hitting on the same spot. Now, actually, I usually do um, this seam in this direction at this angle. I don't know, like this time I just thought, let's see what a new fashion looks like and do it in that way. But usually I do it in this direction. And I kind of just gauge it with my eyes, what is fashion? Where is that at? But those are the rules I use. I don't want it to be on top of the dart. I don't want it to be underneath the breast pocket. And I like to have it straight. For me, it's just easier. And then I just cut this, so they are my pieces. And of course I remember that here I need centimeter seam allowances to join all of this together. So I have already cut that out. Depending on the style you're doing, oh no, this is this piece. You will want to either fuse this portion where the pocket is going and this whole portion of the facing. As you know, fusing, it tends to sabotage you later on, and it makes things kind of like rigid. So I'm not fusing that. I'm just putting a cotton backing. Also, one thing I must say is that here where this piece joins, I make sure that I've got just those marks there, and that notches here, so that I can know where I'm going to join that piece in a minute. Here, if I do fuse, if I've negotiated a bit of a different price with the client, then I'm not going to fuse onto this section, onto the lapel, because this folds over onto the body or onto the outside. So I don't want fusing on that. And I'll just fuse this section and stop behind the break line. But also now with this, with this cotton backing, I'm also not going to go all the way. I'm going to stop, I'm about 1.5 centimeters back from the break line. And of course, I'm just going to baste that, which is a bit of a tedious process, so I won't keep you for the whole thing. I'm just going to do one line on the outside. Now here I am going to layer a little bit because I don't want the seams to be too thick. So I'm making sure I'm a little bit back from the seam. Just doing one more or less in the middle. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and baste all of that. So these pieces I have fused and obviously let them cool down completely. So now I'm going to join this piece with the lining, 1 centimeter seam allowance, and of course the extra seam allowance that goes here, 1.5 for the armhole, 2 for the shoulder, 1.5 for the side seam. Obviously you have to include all of that as you're cutting. So here, just joining these pieces. Now this portion, just one thing I can say about this is that, it just is a rectangle, so it can be a little bit difficult to know your orientation. So I have, hopefully, was this one of the pocket pieces? I've actually confused this with one of the pocket pieces because it is just that rectangular. Here it is. This is the actual piece. And there's my waist marked so that, when I join the rest of this, the waist is ready. So the waist is obviously on the outside. And then I've got just a mark here showing where I'm going to be joining. So I just mark the outside and the top so that I know, I don't accidentally flip it this way because it is a bit of a, like I said, just a plain old rectangle. So it can be a little bit difficult to orientate it exactly. And I'm just going to stitch that with the 1 centimeter seam allowance. Nothing too exciting. Well, it's quite exciting, to be honest. Making fashion, what could be more exciting than that? Right. That is going to the sewing machine. And this, I'll continue the base. So here, may as well do this portion. So I'm going to baste here in front of this backing. Even maybe like 1 centimeter from the edge. Now, of course, the front edge of my jacket, my seam allowance is 1.5 centimeters. This is really just because, if I need to just increase the size of the jacket just a smidge, it's easy to just move that centimeter out. And also 1.5 centimeters, when we get to trimming back the horsehair, just makes it a bit easier than a 1 centimeter. So here I want to be further in than that 1.5 centimeters. So I don't want to end up with my basting in the seam and all the tears that that will involve. So just basting around, basting around. Of course, I will do one here at the back. That one I'll probably do in the seam. And now just this front part that's right by the lapel, a little bit back from the brake line, I'm going to herringbone stitch that with a line stitch. So this will be quite permanent. Similar to how we do a trouser or how we do the hem of the jacket. And I'm just going to pick up, now this is, on the inside of the jacket, so you won't see these stitches. You just see some prick marks at the back there, but of course I still don't want a huge stitch showing. So I'm just picking up a thread or two of the fabric, catching the pearl, or I mean catching the backing, catching the pearl like that. So I'm going to continue that and then I'll flip it over, and here in the seam allowance I'll do another basic stitch. Seam allowance here is 1 centimeter, and I do want to trim this back a little bit, so I'll do it like 3/4 centimeter along here, just so that I can trim this back, but that basting stitch can be permanent, then I don't have to stress about pulling it out later. Okay, so here's this portion of the facing, the part that's going to then flip over for the lapel. And you can see what I've done from that basting stitch there. I just trimmed it back a little bit so that we don't have 500 seams all ending at the exact same spot. Something I forgot also is that here, this eventually is going to get flipped under 1 centimeter. So here I cut 1.5 and just do a herringbone there. And then, depending on how I feel on the day, sometimes I'll stitch this or fuse this down with a bit of fusing. If it's a thicker fabric, I don't do that. A thin fabric like this, I feel needs a bit of stability. So I do that there. And what I can also do here, if I remember at this stage, is to stitch along here, really just on this curved portion. Just stitch 1 centimeter like a stay stitch, because that's going to get snipped and then folded under. So it's good for me to have a line. Maybe I do like 8 mils so that I can fold that stitch line under, and I know I've got that 1 centimeter. So that portion's done. Of course, I gave it all a nice neat iron so those 2 layers can act as one. And then here I've got this portion, and you see how that's going to join together there. Here you can, if you want, manipulate your pattern to put a little pleat there. And some people also do it here. Just give a little bit of pleat there. Me, I really don't see the need. I will be gathering this ever so slightly so that the lining is just that little bit bigger. So I do that movement with a gather rather than with a pleat. So with these 2 pieces together, I'm then going to go ahead and do a prick stitch, top and bottom. And this I do in like a decorative way. And also here at the top, this seam allowance I've ironed upwards, as you can see there. And I don't want over time for gravity to pull this seam allowance so that it flips down like this and creates a very unsightly little bubble over there. So in order to prevent that, I am going to do this prick stitch, and I don't want to do it just on the top, so I'll do it on the bottom as well, just to, in a way, balance things. You see here I've got a bit of a mismatch right there by the arm. You can just stop judging me. You know that I always cut like a cowboy. I cut a little bit extra outside the lines, especially with the lining, because that at the end of the day needs to be a little bit bigger, but like a smidge bigger just to give movement. If you have a silkier lining, it's not so important. I always line with a cotton, and cotton isn't as silky smooth as like an acetate or, heaven forbid, a polyester. So there is not as important, but the little bit of ease in the lining just allows it to shift and slide smoothly over your shirt, whatever you're wearing, your waistcoat, whatever that you're wearing underneath, which just helps the whole jacket to feel more comfortable and to just fit better on the body. So I don't think I'll bore you so much with that. Let me just do this one line, and then we'll talk about the next thing. Obviously, you could machine this, and you could also use a very fun, cute like car or a duck or whatever stitch you want to do there. I'm just doing this prick stitch because that's kind of what I'm used to. I'm actually just thinking now it would be fun to do one of my fab stitches here. I think I'm going to skip that for now and just put the fab stitches on the labels when I get there. A little bit, I don't know, a little bit nervous about those fab stitches because I haven't done that before. And I'm scared it's going to be a little bit too fabulous for my clientele. But look at this lining. This lining is so gorgeous. I'm sure they can handle it. If they can't handle it, I'll just unpick that portion, do a herringbone stitch, something a little bit more conservative. Okay, so obviously I'll do that at the bottom as well. And then I can just join this. Obviously I'll check here that this is smooth. You know, if I have a mismatch here, I'll smooth it out. And then I'll join it here. I just have to search for my notches and see that that's going to line up nicely. And as you know, things move around. It also with an angle, the notch might not be exactly where I intended it. So you see there's a little bit extra here at the top, which I am expecting. You can just see here at the bottom. Oh, so that's too little at the bottom. So let's move that down. So that notch is maybe at the top of the seam allowance. Yeah, then top will match perfectly. And bottom will, yeah, match totally fine. Still a little bit short, but this is cut without seam allowance. So theoretically, it should be 1.5 centimeters shorter. And here you can see it's about 1 centimeter shorter. So that's perfect because it means I have a little bit of gather there. You know, I don't, I suppose I can do this now and I'll just prick stitch the other one later. So I will put a little bit of gather in the lining, as I was saying, just gives a little bit of extra ease. And remember this basting stitch that I did here is inside the seam allowance, which is 1 centimeter. So that's just going to be there forever. This is not lining up exactly how I want it to, so I'm going to reverse a little bit. Anything on a curve is always a little bit of a challenge. Unfortunately, this curve is not really major. And maybe the curve itself will just give me enough of that gather. Okay. Let me just come down here. So here it's nothing too exciting. Just checking where are my notches in comparison. So yeah, so no, they're about a centimeter too high, but that's totally fine. These things tend to move around, which is why I cut everything a little bit bigger than it should be. Because we're making it by hand, it's not going to all come together perfectly like a puzzle. There's always going to be some kind of random little mismatch somewhere. Okay, so here, yeah, like you see, now a little bit over 1 centimeter, maybe 125 centimeters. Now at the end of the day, this portion, the seam allowance here is 1.5 centimeters. I'm going to stitch 1.5, so I know 1.5 centimeters. That's now the edge of my jacket where this is going to turn up. And this seam I want about 2 centimeters. Usually I do 1.5 just for in case. I want 1.5 centimeters above the bottom of the hem. So I'm just going to actually come to think of it, usually my hem is 5 centimeters, but because of all the fitting that I've done with this chap, the hem is actually 6 centimeters. So I'm going to move this up 2 centimeters above the 1.5. So everything together comes to 3.5. And this is because you can see this turn up is now about 2 centimeters. Usually it's about 1.5. No, about 2.5 centimeters. And if you think about the rest of the jacket ending here and then turning up 6 centimeters, I will want this to be able to come all the way up and join that seam at the top at 6. And I won't want to like pull it in a funny direction. So I'll see when I get here to the side, how that plays itself out. But I don't want it to like have to pull along this diagonal because that will pull my garment skew. So yeah, I'm increasing that to 2. Usually it's about 1.5 for me. So yeah, I'm just going to stitch that at 1 centimeter seam allowance, ending over there. Of course, I would have prick stitched that beforehand, but in this case, whatever. I'm just going to stitch that and I'll prick stitch this after the event. That is that step at this time. Right, so there we have it. I have forgotten again that I need my guiding stitch over here, so I will do that next time I go to the machine. You see, I've just joined here, and this is kind of my style. As I say, usually this is actually slanted that way. Maybe I'll just do it straight next time. I don't know. I'll see. I'm always kind of developing and changing as I go. So here, I do stitch this portion twice because I'm going to cut through here to put the pocket. So I want some stabilization there. Then here I just notch it so that this portion I can flip open so that here it's nice and flat. And then here I push the seam allowances all to one side because this is softer than this portion is. So push that all to one side, and then just one thing here at the bottom, I just kind of twist it over so that when I stitch, I've got this neat edge there ready for me when I join this to the front of the suit. So from there, nothing really exciting. I'm just going to put the pockets in. Won't let you hang around for all of that. You'll just kind of see it as it goes. But yeah, that's what I'm doing next. Pockets, and then we'll be attaching. All right, so here's the facing. Finished and sewed up with the pockets in here. Labels are on. Everything's done. These double jet pockets. I've got a video on that, so you can check it out. The only thing you'll see with this is that I've got a bit of prick stitching there just to keep this flap from kind of, with the weight of the pocket, kind of that lip from poking up like that. And you'll see I also do here, it's a double jet pocket with a flap. And then here I just stitch here to the seam allowance and here to the horsehair. Again, just to make sure that with the weight of the pocket, this lip doesn't end up poking out like that. So let me just check my phone. Okay, Google is sending the hangers. Fabulous. All right, so with that done, we then look at this front piece of the jacket. And here, traditionally, you just add extra here in case you have to expand, and also to keep the salvage. You can kind of show the client that the very expensive fabric they ordered is indeed the one you are using. You haven't just switched it up. Let me see what I'm doing here. There's 7. this little bit. So here you can see, here's the original where we wanted to put the hem, and then we decided to expand it a little bit. So this is now the final shape of the garment. This that I'm drawing here, and then this tailor's tacks all the way up here. This is the final shape. So I'm going to go ahead and all around here, just marking this in quite nicely, and here we have a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So, and this is usually 1.5, yeah, so that's perfect. Okay, so that's 1.5. I'm going to go around. I want to just trim that ever so slightly and mark out a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Suppose you could do a 1 centimeter, but 1.5 is just helps with my anxiety. So I'm just going around and marking out 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Now, depending on the shape of the gent, this front portion can be very straight. The shape of this gentleman is not like that. So I can't just use a ruler there. Got to go around making the dots. So here you want your 1.5 at the hem to go around. And you don't want to go past where you're putting your facing. So the facing now has the 1.5, so that's going to come there. And that's lining up pretty perfectly. If I look at it here at the top, it looks like I'm not going to trim down that 1.5. So I'll just get rid of that. And then just trim it from there. Perfect. And here it is coming. So you don't want this 1.5 to go beyond here. You want to stop maybe 2 centimeters at least, maybe a little bit more. But 2 centimeters is fine. So I'm going to stop about here. And I'll just measure that 15 centimeters so that I can do the same on the other side. So that then just goes into the usually 5 centimeter hem. This one is 6 centimeters. Okay, so here is then the edge of my pattern piece. And this is what I'm going to cut out in a minute. Just drawing this all up. Now, because the facing was drawn with the seam allowance, before I cut and regret, I can just check it on this one. Now, there is going to be a bit of distortion because of the darts and all of that, but this should match up here. That's looking quite like it. This one feels a little bit shorter, but that's fine. So it is definitely 3 centimeters below where we fitted, so yeah, that's fine. Okay. So having done that, just make sure I don't cut something I was not intending to cut. I'm just going to cut this out. And I'm cutting now because the horsehair also was extended beyond the edge of the pattern piece so that we can fit. Let me just move this a little bit. The horsehair was extended beyond the edge of the pattern piece so that if I had to expand here, I would still have enough horsehair. So I'm now cutting through all the layers, the pattern piece and the horsehair. If you want, you can do a stay stitch. Keep all these layers nice and neat and together. I don't really feel it's necessary because we're going to come back and trim the horsehair anyways. Maybe just one here, just for funsies. Okay, so now we have the pattern piece ready. And then go on the back side and mark out my 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Because this piece must be straight, so straighten it up. And this piece is 1 centimeter seam allowance from here, more or less straight, so there's where it joins. And then yeah, just mark out my 1.5 centimeters. All along. Now here, I know that this is going to turn. Now I'm not doing it exactly at 7 because I need to smooth it into the side panel. So it's like 6 and a bit, but here this must be straight. Just drawing all that in. Okay, and then before I cut it, I want to check that with my pattern piece that I've got the correct look there. A little bit longer than the pattern piece. But yeah, that's fine. Because you know, things are always going to warp as you work on them. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Before I cut this, I'm going to do the other side so I can just compare them to each other. So I'm going to have a little bit of a break and we'll be back in a minute. All right, so you know, I've been checking this as I go, making sure that the two sides are the same. And here I've just cut out the 1.5 centimeter. You see here at the top, I'm leaving, you know, here where the other piece of the collar joins, this horsehair you want to come actually more or less all the way to the edge because you're going to attach that piece on here and you want some stability. So I'm going to go to the right side and I'm going to ditch all of this, all of these tailor's tacks. Because I don't want this to be in the way of my stitching in a minute, on the way of the fusing, on the way of the, well, the machine stitching where I'm going to sew this together. I'm not going to take out the break line that I want to keep. So yeah, from here, your sequence is really up to you. This was just a bit of a stay stitch with that. Okay, so I'm going to draw in this break line. Now here, because this does warp, sometimes the break line is not 1000% straight. Obviously, I'm just going to straighten that up. Move this tailor's tacks. Okay. And then here there is, okay, so with all this hand stitching, I'm definitely waxing my threads because I don't have so much emotional capacity that I can just deal with knotted threads. All right, so here along this break line, I'm just going to do like a prick stitch, and this lapel is going to fold over like this, so it's going to kind of create bulk there. So as I'm stitching, I'm just pulling it so that it's super tight, so that it can roll nice and easy. And there's nothing too exciting about it, just making sure I don't have any excess here, so when it folds over, I don't have the bubble there. And also this part of the chest here, the arm is here moving forward the whole time, so this fabric's always kind of bunching here. So when you do this basting, you don't want to stretch this fabric over the chest so that over time it doesn't end up collapsing. I can't really say anything more very exciting here, other than the fact that hand stitching is the mark of bespoke. It is really what makes the garment special. And you could theoretically do this by machine. The factory ones are just glued here. Because this piece is behind the lapel. If you have machine stitch there, no one will know. But of course, to make this really luxury, it's better to do by hand. So here I'm not going to come all the way to the end. I'm going to just see where is the end of my, here it is. So I'm always a bit paranoid that because this rolls over and might not roll over exactly on the right point. So I don't want these stitches to be visible on the right side. So you just stop 2, 3 fingers before I get to the near the edge of the horsehair there, just at that break point. Okay. And there we are. You can see now I've got my break line perilously close to where the domette is. Usually this should be at least a centimeter back, but you know, things warp around. Stop judging. So here it really depends. I like to first secure the rest of the horsehair. So from here, I'm really just going to travel a little bit to the edge here. And here, a herringbone between the horsehair and the fabric. Making sure that you don't over tighten and create like a little curve here in the fabric. Here you are supposed to do a band just around the edges here. I am not going to do that. I'm going to do a little bit of cheat there just to save myself a little bit of time with all of this hand stitching. Here also along the bottom, herringbone stitch. Here maybe do it a little bit wider, just so that the stitch on the fabric will very definitely be turned underneath with the hem. So yeah, this just secures everything in place. All right, and here we are at the end. Just going to go few times in one place to knock off there. Alright, so with that done, I'm going to come here to the lapel and I'm going to draw in, I draw mine about 2 centimeters, just to give me a guide. I'm going to stitch in between this. I just like having a guide here. Then here on this peak, and I'll do this even if it's not a peak lapel, I'm just going to kind of isolate that section. I'm going to stitch this a little bit differently. And also if it wasn't a peak lapel, I would just isolate this tip section so we can stitch that curving towards the body. Alright, so my waxed thread helping me to maintain my sanity, medium. Okay, let's keep going. So, now as I was saying, the correct hand technique is really going to help you here, not only to save your hands from cramping, but really to speed up your work. So you see, pushing the needle with the thimble on my index finger, using the pointer and the thumb to hold the needle, and then grab it, and with your pinky, regulate that tension. So see, these stitches are quite small. And like I say, for me it's easy to do it off the edge of the table because that helps me to get a good angle with the stitch. And I'm curving this really quite severely here in the beginning. So I'm just going to follow. See here, I didn't finish stitching the break line, but now because this stitch is a little bit above the break line, I'm not too fast. So I'll go all the way to the edge. Now coming back, I want to go in between or in the middle of the previous stitch so that we don't create a wave pattern. And again, curving this quite severely because these first few lines, I usually do 4 lines like this, are the ones that are really curving the lapel backwards. Some people continue like this, doing this curve the whole way. I feel it creates a bit of a ice cream cone shape, so I do it just a little bit differently. Good job. Here in the beginning, just curving quite severely. Remaining calm when you get a knot, not freaking out or becoming stressed, just being calm. So one of the reasons to always cut your horsehair bigger than your pattern piece so that you can later trim it down and then you won't have all of this crazy fray happening. And I'm just then again going down, curving as severely as possible on that line and stitching in between or in the middle of my previous stitch so that we don't have all the stitches lining up, which would create a wave pattern in the fabric, you know. Coming all the way to the end. And back up. I'm going to stitch. You see, here's my line, my guideline to keep me straight. So I'm going to stitch in the middle of that. Maybe I'll do one more row coming back down directly on the guideline. So now I'll come down on this guideline. And there I can see I've done 5 lines or five rows of stitching between the break line and the guideline. So I can use that kind of as an estimate that I'm going to have 5 lines of stitching until the next 2 centimeter guideline. So here it depends on how I'm feeling on the day. Sometimes I'll increase my stitch length just a little bit. Sometimes I'll just stick with this one, and today I think I'll just stick with this one just for funsies. But I won't continue this roll being so extreme. And you can see that the lapel is already rolling. It's already wanting to come in this direction. Now it is, it's folding there, so I don't want this portion to curve under. So from here, I'm going to continue curving, but not so extreme. Bit of a slightly less curve. So how I do, so now, these previous ones I've bent it on the line that I'm stitching. So this one I'm going to bend the previous line, meaning that this line that I'm stitching is not going to be so much curved because I'm bending the previous line. Oh yeah, I'm rolling on the previous line. So this one is a little bit more straight, even though it still has curve to it. That's just how I do. So then if I want to increase my stitch length and width, I'll start by doing one row that's kind of 1.5. So here's my half, so then I'll line up with that one, and then I'll stitch 1.5 and be in the middle of that one, half and one, line up with that one, which will increase my stitch length. And then sometimes I increase the width also. So maybe instead of doing 5 lines every 2 centimeters, I'll do 4. Just because this part of the lapel, it doesn't need the, it doesn't need so much of the roll. It really just needs to be stitched down onto the horsehair. But this one I'm just feeling extra today, so I'm going to continue my stitch length. Maybe I'll do only 4 lines between the guides, we'll see. So here where I've excluded out the peak portion, I'm just going to go slightly over that so I don't have a weird break there. And just keep going, just keep hand stitching. And I can already see with this one, I'm going to do the next stitch just this side of the 2 centimeter line, which will actually make it more like 3 stitch lines between the 2 centimeter lines, which I'm totally fine with. So like I said here, we don't really need the roll. We need much more of the just joining the layers together. You can see if you look at it like this, that these stitches are more closely packed than these ones, and that's totally fine. So I feel like 3 rows of stitches is really reasonable between the lines for the portion that is not wanting to be rolled. The portion that's rolled, you really want those to be quite close together. So there are 5 stitches between the lines, 5 rows of stitches between the lines. I think is reasonable. So I'm coming all the way to the top, past that line because I want to secure that. Going back down, up and down, up and down. This is why I like hiking so much. You just climb up a mountain so you can come down the other side. And sometimes come down the same side, right back to where you started. Anyways, this is why I think so deeply, because I just have hours and hours and hours of hand stitching every day. A lot of time to think some very crazy things. Yeah, no knots, just going to knot 3 times in one place. I'm going to wax this thread. Yep, and again, 3 times in one place to begin. here coming just a little bit over the line that I have there for the peak. All right, so basically done all of that, as you can see there. And you can see it is wanting to roll this way, which is great. I'm now going to focus just on the peak here. And again, I don't want a hectic roll. I want this peak to end up turning under on itself. Now I'm going to go along that line that I stitched, so it's a little bit over the previous stitches, just so that I don't have a weird break between the peak and the rest of the lapel. Of course, yeah. And I also don't want to just stitch too much of a curve. So again, I'm just curving on the previous stitch line. So there's a bit of a curve to the peak, but it doesn't end up curving back on itself. And just carrying on all the way to the very tip. There we go. Okay, so you can see it's going to curve backwards, so when this lies on the body, it's not going to flap around. So now what I'm going to do is come back along the edge. I'm going to come back along the edge. I'm going to just curve the edge back like that, so that when it falls over here, the edge is still kind of tight against the body. So I'm just going to go around the edge. Now this is a single stitch, so it's really not going to do all that much for me, but it makes me feel better, and like I say, just make sure everything curves nice and hugs the body. So here I am bending exactly on the stitch line, giving quite a severe curve there. Just doing that all the way down. And going. Try not to stab anyone's eye out by flying needle caused by a random knot. And then again here, I'm not going to go all the way to the edge, just because I don't want this to be visible. Stuff around there. Yeah, and that portion is herringbone, so that is that for the preparation of the front piece. Just not off 3 times in one spot. Yeah, I'm going to do the other one, and then we'll start joining. Right, so all of that stitching is now done. You can go over and just iron this flat, just to make it a bit easier to work with. Obviously, the stitches will eventually just continue to curve it back like that. But if you have any random bubbles, ironing it flat is going to help you out. So I'm going to now just join the facing. So here I can line it up. And that is looking basically perfect. So what I'm going to do is come on this side. Oh, it doesn't really matter actually. Let me stick on this side, it's going to be a bit easier for me. Okay, so this is all lined up. Nice. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this lining up, especially here on the shoulder. It's quite important. Here at the bottom we have a little bit of excess. So what we want to do really is scooch it up just a little bit, not more than 1/4 centimeter. Then I'm going to see here, where's my break line? I'm just going to pin that as my center. Now, this piece here is going to need to flap around and over the lapel, because the lapel is going to now turn over like this. So this needs just a little bit of ease, which is why we scooched it up just slightly. It's really a very, very, very small amount, because you don't want to have now random bubbles on your lapel. Very unfashionable. So you're really just scooching this ever so slightly. You can baste this if you want, if you are extra like that. So yeah, this portion, also just giving it that little bit of excess. Some people will, in a way, let me check this out. Some people will pin like this, and then go around and stitch this, so it just creates that excess there. There's a lot of different ways. This is just the one that works for me. Is to pin in that excess, pin in that little bubble as I go around. So you see, this at the end of the day, this is kind of the shape I want. You see, it's already wanted to roll over like that. And here at the bottom, now this portion here is where it needs to now flip from the inside around to the outside. So again, I'm going to give it just a little bit of extra TLC. But not so far down, just to maybe right here. A little bit underneath where that break line is. Okay, then this portion, not um, pulling or anything like that, just making sure this is 100% smooth. Because now this portion, we don't want the excess. In fact, this portion we actually want to pull in towards the body. So here I'm just going to make sure that that's 100% smooth. Here at the bottom, I want to make sure that here at the top, I'm matching my shoulder. There it is. So you see I've got this bit of excess there, so that's fantastic. Which means here I'm actually going to just pull this a little bit. Put it down there. And actually, before I do that, I should just, not really pulling or stretching or anything like that, just really making sure it's 1000% smooth. So that this will curve in towards the body and will pull the hem a little bit up. And then here, I've just put a pin right at the edge of where the facing ends. So that here, because I'm going to be stitching on this side, I can see where is my pin, which I cannot see. Well, there it is. But I can see where my pin is, so I know where to stop stitching. So now I'm going to go head over to the machine, stitch this up. And here I'm just going to stitch to the bottom of that. If it was a regular lapel, a notch lapel, then you would be stitching up into this join where the top of the collar is going to come. So I'm stitching there, and I'm stitching as usual, maybe 2 mils, maybe 1 mil next door to the horsehair. All the way around, stopping there, obviously backstitch, backstitch. All right, so there you see I stitched it right next door, maybe like 2 mils next to the horsehair. Then I came over, obviously first ironed it flat, then came over and put this tape of fusing. So that's my cheat to not put the tape around here, hours of hand stitching. Because this fusing, it kind of creates that tape effect. When we fold it over, you have a nice fold there. And also helps to keep the horsehair, nicely stuck to the fabric. Then what I do, I've ironed that, and just one thing here at the tip, you don't want so much bulk there. So make sure, I don't know if you can see, there's not 2 layers of fusing over there. I made sure I cut this one at an angle so that here we don't have so much bulk. Fuse that and then go again. This time I stitch from this side, and I just stitch right next door, maybe 2 mils next door, all the way around. It's not all that necessary here on this front edge part. It does help here by the peak, not to fray too much, and definitely down here by this curve. I like to have that double stitch because I'm going to trim this quite close. So once that's done, I am going to find, this is right. Okay, so here I can see my break line. It's coming straight there, way too close to the domette. Stop judging me. So I can see here where it comes onto the edge of the garment. And there I'm just going to give a little notch for myself. Now, seeing this line, I know I can get pretty close to that line because I know this line is still 2 mils from the stitch line that's right next door to the horsehair. So now I have to think a little bit. Always the seam allowance that's going to be closest to the outside of the garment needs to be the longest. So this is the outside of the garment, so this one needs to be the longest. So this seam allowance I can trim, and I can trim it reasonably close to that stitch line. Because that stitch line kind of stops it from fraying further. Of course, here on the peak, I'm going to cut that tip off. There, of course, I backstitched up and down there. Cut that off. I'm going to check on this side. No, that's way too far from the stitching to give me a nice turn. So I'm going to just make sure before I cut further here. No, I'll be fine. I'm just going to cut maybe a little bit more just to get close. You know, a point is always such a finicky thing. Too close and it frays out of control. Too far and it's too far. Can't turn it. Okay, so here, let's think. This one is going to turn under. Actually, yeah, in this case, we just snip both of them to that point. And again, I want to trim this one down. So here, I then do the opposite. I trim this portion, because yeah, this is now against the garments, that must be the longest one. And I like using these scissors with the serrated edge because they really grip the fabric so lacquer. Okay, so here on the curve, I'm going to come quite close to my stitching. And here at the bottom, I'm actually not going to really trim, I'm just going to kind of fade out. Not cut all the layers, just fade out to there. So then I'm going to go around again. Now this curve, I've got to trim closer, but I am going to trim 1 mil further out than what I already have. Just so that I don't have 500 pieces, ending on the same edge. And here I'm just going to just do just a few little notches, just to allow this to just turn a little bit neatly. I'm not really going, I'm notching to that second stitch line, I'm not really going further than that. Now here on the lapel, I feel that's pretty trimmed down enough. I'm just going to trim the second one down just close to the peak here. That's where I really don't want bulk. But again, leaving, mismatching those seam allowances so that we're going to have like a smooth edge. All right. Once we're done with that, we can very gently, very cautiously flip that around. So knitting needle, dangerous game that we're playing here, but I quite like it. Officially, I'm sure you know by now, it is absolutely illegal to push anything from the inside here. To do this, you have to actually take a pin and pull on the stitches. But I always like doing this. This is my method. I'm going to get that as pointy as possible without sending this knitting needle right the way through the fabric. There we go. Okay. Bring that all around. And this are going to best. So, this break line on the facing portion doesn't have, is sometimes not 1000% accurate. As you can see, there's my actual break line. So where my actual break line is, I'm just going to put a pin. And here I'm just going to pull out that. Here we go. So what we're now going to baste all the way around, and here on this portion that's below the break line, I want the facing to be curling a little bit inwards, so that on the outside we see just a nice flat piece. We don't see that seam allowance, or we don't see the seam really. So this is why we pulled this portion a little bit tight, so that the fabric is automatically pulling back like that. Just going around, making sure with my fingers that we've gotten all the way out to the edge of the the stitch line or the edge of the horsehair, and just basting along. This I always baste. I never do this by iron first, because once you iron this in, very difficult to change it. And I also want to just double check with the other side. These two came out identical, or if I just need to adjust a little bit here or there before I iron. Of course, if you're doing a prick stitch, you'd then be coming around and really setting this in. It depends. I don't know. Actually, so far, every client I've worked with has not wanted the prick stitch, which is such great news for me, because that is just hours of my life that I save over there. So yeah, nothing really to it, just basting along, making sure that the facing is neatly tucked, a little bit back. Okay, so here when I'm approaching this turn of the lapel, I'm going to get a little bit more equal between the two layers, so that by the time I get to the break line, we are going to twist around and then make sure that it's the opposite, that the facing is actually over the front piece, so that on the lapel you're going to again not see the seam, you're going to just see the edge of the fabric. It's just one caution I must say here while I'm working. Depending on your fabric, if it's very soft and you iron it here, you can see the pad stitching that we did. So usually, like this fabric, this is a very soft fabric, so I'm going to just slide a page in there to make sure that I don't iron a nice little motif for this gentleman, because that would cause me so many tears. You can hopefully see on the camera, although it's blue on blue, you can see this kind of, what is it called, honeycomb pattern that we get on the reverse of the lapel. And clients, bespoke clients, will often look for small details like this to make sure that they're really getting their money's worth. So a lot of people will sell bespoke at a bespoke price, and then when you get down to it, they're actually just doing a whole bunch of gluing. So here I'm just putting that last little bit out. I really hate putting the stitches. So just to be a little bit more pointy. Okay, I'm not going to do more than that. Risk my life. Risk my emotions. Yeah, and there it is. So of course I'll now do the other side and check that they're equal before I iron. As you can see there, folds over nicely. Because we gave it that extra, also it's allowed to really bend nicely. And you see that it's holding very close to the body. So yeah, I'm going to do that. Maybe I'll just say some last things here to finish up. This portion here is now going to be folded under that 1 centimeter seam allowance, which is why we stitched that. Folded under, because this is where we're going to join by hand the other part of the collar. I guess there is a way to do it by machine, I just don't know it. Here, I like to just baste this already along here, so that this kind of gets prepared for this portion. Also, what we'll do is we'll scooch up underneath here and stitch this portion of the facing onto the horsehair, and actually just put it back a little bit, this portion. So let me, right now, let me finish all the basting actually on this one. Let's do that. So here, of course, I'll need to just notch this. It's a curve. And theoretically, if we fold it just underneath the curve, we should have 1 centimeter seam allowance back from the outer piece. Just going to go ahead and do that. Let's see. Yeah, it looks okay. I'm just going to check 1 centimeter. It's a little bit more here. Right, that's to be expected. It's not 1000% straight. And that is why this is done on the curve, because it's easier to manipulate a curve that's a little bit skewed in the corner. Okay, so I'll base that in a second. In this, I drew this line up, so that's there. Here I'm just going to base to the seam, because this portion I still need to do a bunch of sewing, so I don't want to base there and then end up having to undo it anyways. And you see here, the facing is coming past where the hem is, about 2 centimeters past. So there's going to close perfectly. Now here, yeah, I don't know, my calculations, maybe I need to recalculate, because here I always struggle to get this edge to join up with this edge. So this portion I'll probably have to finish by hand. I'll see how the rest of the lining comes about, because maybe I could do it like that. There is enough here. That will end about there. Oh, it's not a crime to have a broad portion here. Usually I like this only to be about 2 centimeters. But because this hem is longer, it's now moving further up, and the higher it goes, the higher that seam goes. I'll see. Maybe I'll just do this old school herringbone that, and slip stitch this. I'll see how I feel emotionally. Okay, basting time. Stop getting distracted by fish. Where have I put my needle? Okay, so that portion is done. I'm just going to get this portion. Oh, there we are. Okay, so before I carry on, I'm going to do the other side so that I can make sure these two sides are mirror images. Right, so as luck would have it, my peaks were not the same. So you have to go and unpick this and then restitch, check again. That's how it goes, especially with a peak. I find it's difficult to get both exactly the same. So always just be checking as you go. Don't wait until the very end to realize that your peaks, one peak is longer or broader than the other one, because then you are really going to cry. So here I'm just taking this tailor's tax out. I don't really need this for any reason other than, when we put the backing here or even the fusing, just to know up into which line I can go. Because actually that break line is not super accurate because, things move all the time. So now, I forgot such an important piece, which is the bridle. I'm just doing so many things, making so much fashion, and I'm really going to suffer to try and attach this. So here, this is now on the bias, so it has a tendency to stretch out. This is why I cut this portion of the chest piece a little bit diagonal, so that this portion here is actually on the straight grain. So it doesn't have that much stretch to it. But I feel you absolutely have to put it right, no matter which way you cut anything. So here I'm just using a piece of lining. That's usually what I do because it's nice and soft, easy to work with, and also really doesn't have any stretch if you cut it along the wall. If you cut it on the weft, of course, it's going to have stretch. So what would be the point of that? And so here I'm just placing it just like 2 moles behind the break line, basically on the break line. Here at the bottom, I'm going to stitch, what is that, maybe 3-4 centimeters, or just pin that flat. Have this flat along the break line, and then I'm just going to put a mark here. You're marking it on the lapel there. And let's just bring this maybe to here. So marking it there on the lapel. And then I'm going to move this like 3/4 centimeters up. So this does, in a way, create a bit of chest as well. But mainly it's to do with making sure this lapel does not end up stretching out, or this break line ends up not stretching out. So obviously I don't want all the bubbles in one place. I'm just distributing them out there. And now I'm going to go around. So obviously you should do this before you put the facing on, like a sane person. So I'm going to come along with my navy. And just do a whip stitch around here. So obviously here, I don't really want to be working. I'm just going to start here on the edge. No knots, 3 times in one spot. I'm going to leave the pins in as far as I can. Then I'm just going to whip stitch all the way down, around, and then all the way back up. There's nothing really too exciting about it. Just keeping my left hand underneath there to make sure that none of this gets onto the front side of the garment. So here I'm coming to the end, and I'm really not going to do anything special. I'm just going to continue whip stitching right around the end there. Whip stitching around the edge. You know, you should have done this before. I kind of want to avoid that seam allowance there. I suppose no one will die if I do catch it, but I'm going to be judging myself if I do so. Just get that out of the way. Yeah, again, just catching just the horsehair and the lining or the bridle, and coming back up with the whip stitch. Now I'll take the pins out as I go. Oh, can't believe I forgot that. This is such an important part. And would have been much easier to attach before I put the facing on. Cool. Sometimes I just judge the Benjamin of the past for being a crazy person. So here, this top portion of the bridle, some people will leave long so that you can have one strip all the way into the collar, and they'll also do it broader so that it actually flips over the break line and kind of makes it a little bit smoother on the neck, so you don't have the horsehair. It's like a very harsh um, little horsehair line there at the break line. I am not going to do it like that at this time. I haven't really practiced and experimented with that enough yet to feel confident to do it for a client. We will do our own work. I'll do some more experimentation. But for now, I'm doing what I'm confident with because this is for a client. So I'm not going to do too many experimental things at his expense. So yeah, I'm just going to wrap it up there. And get rid of the end of that. Rebase this portion. Right, so just basting this. I'm going to have to open it up, when I do the shoulders, etc. So I'm not too precious about it, as long as I get that 1 centimeter seam allowance, 1 centimeter distance from the edge of the fore part. And then here, towards the lapel, actually, we should be putting a bit of a gather, because this does need to flip over like that. So we don't want this portion here to be too tight. Okay, here we are. Imagine being so insane that you just forget the bridle. Okay, so from here, we now want to just secure this lapel in place, or this facing in place. So we're going to make sure this is all nice and flat. And here I can take out these tailor's tags, because they really were just there to make sure I know where to stop either putting the fusing or putting the backing that I put here. I'm going to come over this side, and I want it to roll like it wants to roll. Then I'm going to just mark out where is the break line. Now, actually, before I do that, we do just need to do a little bit of a baste here. So I'm going to flip this way, because I need to make sure that there's enough fabric for this to turn over. If we make this too tight here, then our lapel is not going to be able to flip over. Obviously, this is extreme now, but we need to make sure that there's enough fabric for this to flip over, not too much, not too little. In the same way that we had a bit of excess here, so that the pole can bend over that seam. So there's really nothing to it. I'm just going to look kind of where the break line is and just do a baste in the form of a pad stitch, just to keep the amount of facing that I need turning over here in place. And then here, keeping it rolled, I just want to do the same thing, maybe, I don't know, 5 or so centimeters just back from the break line, just to kind of, in a way, trap that excess facing where we want it, which is right there on the break line. This, I feel, just sometimes ends up wobbling around too much. Okay, so, and you can see, if we flatten this, you can see there's a little mountain of fabric there that allows this lapel to now roll over like that. So now with it a little bit rolled, we can mark or I can say transfer the break line to the facing. Just keep that a little bit of a, here we go. And now I want to be back from there about 1.5 centimeters. No real rule. I'd say more than a centimeter. 2 centimeters, fine. 3 centimeters, maybe a bit too much. I'm going to measure about 3 centimeters, about 3 fingers, from the edge of the break line. Just marking that off, and then also from the top there, because here I still need to get in to do some stitching. And here, this stitch could theoretically go all the way through to the right side. It's highly unlikely, and it shouldn't. But you see there, it's going to be there. So if this is closed, it's still going to cover that and can just be a secret between you and me. All right, so now we've got that marked up. I'm just going to do a prick stitch along there. Here I'm just going to wiggle in here. Get underneath there. Now I'm keeping the lapel folded or rolled and just stitching, with my left hand underneath, making sure that I don't come all the way through to the front of the garment. You can theoretically do this by machine, just stitch through all the layers all the way to the front. Because, like I just showed you now, the lapel is actually going to cover that stitch. So I've seen it a lot of times. People do it. I really feel it's not high fashion to do like that, so I don't do it. But I'm just some crazy person who forgot how to put a bridal stitch. So you do you. Was whilst doing this stitch actually that I realized in a minute that I completely forgotten about the bridle. So that's obviously why you have to do the stitch by hand, because it helps you to remember not to be a braid. Okay. I am extra, so I'm going to pass this knot back. And tie it back here somewhere. Okay, just double check. Yeah, falling beautifully. So then the rest of this, here doesn't need to be so tight, but this does kind of curve on the body, so it's going to help if it's a little bit not tight but stable. Remember the pocket bag, the shoulder pad is coming here, so I usually kind of measure middle of the gorge down, and that's where I'm going to stop stitching. I make sure my pocket bags, everything is lying nice and smooth. And I'm just going to stitch, just pin this, kind of stabilize it. I'm going to come down to the bottom here. So now I can't do anything while this pocket bag is here. So up to the bottom of the pocket bag is just what it is. But there's also the buttons and this little politics. So it's a bit of maybe a cowboy region. So here, I'm going to push it. I'm not going to do anything extreme. I'm not going to pull it like this. Just push it so that it is just lifting the front of the garment, because this is going to just pull it so that it really hugs the body. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's start with the easy portion. You also don't have that much glue on this needle. So step one, find the Wait, question. So now flipping this up, I can stitch from this seam allowance onto the horsehair. Now here, I'm going to do a herringbone, which has a bit of stretch in it, because we don't want it to be too extreme. We don't want it too tight. We want there to be a bit of movement, because the body is always in motion. Yeah, just stitching between the horsehair and the seam allowance of the facing. And in fact, I think this is actually going to be this. Let's get rid of that little. Yeah, I could stitch around this, but today it's going to be gold. Nothing to it, just a regular old herringbone. Again, you can just glue this. Use that double-sided glue. Double-sided, you know what I mean. You can just glue this. You can also, prepare it. So when you sew it, you sew in a piece of fusing. I used to do that for many years. So I can see where my pin is. I'm just going to stop there. But obviously, hand stitching is the best because it has a little bit of movement. The glue will not perish over time, which is a very important part. Okay, so that's the top portion. Down here at the bottom, it gets a little bit more interesting. Keep it to a single thread. Okay, so I like to close this portion one time. So I'm going to go, just going to kind of start randomly up here, just so that my knot is not in the middle of nowhere. Travel down, and I'm just going to whip stitch this little portion here. So let's see, that is part of the basting. This, I'm actually just going to get this out of my way for a second. There's one thing I really dislike, it's fighting to unpick a baste stitch that has been stitched over by machine or by hand. Yeah, so nothing too exciting. I'm just going to whip stitch this. I know there's a easier machine way to do this. I just don't know it yet. And also a big part of the steps that I'm doing is that it's designed around the fitting process so that you can kind of fit this portion, finish it, fit this portion, finish it like that. Which is of course very time consuming, but the fit that you get from that is so excellent. And the design process also that you can go through with the client to now discuss the types of pockets, the types of buttons, all the different things, step by step. It's a really fun process to go through. Okay, and here we are, back to the top. I do want to continue the stitch, kind of locking this portion of the seam allowance and that portion of the hem. Okay, then turn this way. And now again, herringbone stitch. Now here, remember we had that whole palaver about being in front of the pocket, what. And let me tell you, I almost never actually get it right. My pocket, bag, and my facing always, well not always, but very often are in conflict. So as long as I can kind of get underneath there, I'll be fine. Stop judging me. Okay, where are we? So from there, there's really nothing to it. I'm going to continue this herringbone stitch, locking the facing onto the horsehair. And yeah, I mean that's, unless I've forgotten something else critical, I think that is that. And there we go. That is that. I think the last thing that I'll look at, but I won't do it now, I'll do it, when I'm talking about the vents, is that I'll check the seam here on the side and just line this up because this did not take into account the dart when I cut this pattern piece. So we'll check here, check where is the seam. That's actually okay. We can be a little bit over. So I'm just marking where's the seam. There it is. So that's the seam underneath. So I'll trim this back to match that. A little bit over so that you have a bit of movement here. And of course making sure to mark my waist, which was there. And the waist mark here is up here, which is quite high. But yeah, things do move around. So yeah, I mean that's that. There's your facing, lapel sorted. Obviously, yeah, maybe one thing I can say here, there's different styles. One is to iron the living daylights out of this to make it nice and crisp here. Other one likes this to be in a nice roll. It kind of depends. Me, I like to iron kind of in between. I don't do a big roll. I iron it flat, but I put something here. So I put some folded fabric here, and then I iron it. So it's